The smallest decision you make in 60 seconds can quietly rewrite the next 60 years of your life. Maya Brooks had repeated those words to herself ever since graduating college, believing that success belonged to people who kept showing up no matter how difficult life became. At 28, she had spent years balancing part-time jobs, evening certification classes, and endless applications, hoping one company would finally see her potential instead of the zip code where she grew up. That Tuesday morning felt different from every other morning before it. The autumn air across Midtown Manhattan carried a crisp chill, sunlight reflected from towering glass buildings, and every traffic light seemed to be working in her favor as she walked quickly toward the subway station. Inside her black leather portfolio rested multiple copies of her resume, carefully organized references, and handwritten notes she had studied until nearly 2 o'clock the night before. In exactly 35 minutes, she was scheduled to interview for an analyst position at Carter Global Holdings, one of the most respected investment firms in America. Friends had told her thousands of applicants would gladly trade places with her. She knew they were right. This interview wasn't simply another opportunity. It represented the possibility of paying off her student loans, helping her widowed mother retire earlier than expected, and finally proving that talent could overcome circumstances. Every step she took echoed with quiet determination instead of fear. She checked the time on her phone while weaving through busy commuters carrying coffee cups and briefcases. 9 minutes remained before she needed to enter the lobby. She smiled for the first time that morning, believing everything was unfolding exactly as planned. Then, only a few yards ahead, the rhythm of the sidewalk suddenly changed. A well-dressed man walking alone slowed unexpectedly before collapsing onto the pavement. For a heartbeat, hundreds of strangers froze. Some stared. Others instinctively stepped around him, assuming someone else would help. Maya stopped without thinking. Her interview, her future, her carefully planned schedule all seemed to collide inside a single impossible moment. She glanced toward the distant office tower where her dream waited, then back at the unconscious stranger whose breathing appeared shallow. Logic urged her to keep moving. Compassion refused to let her. Kneeling beside him, she spoke calmly, asking if he could hear her while another pedestrian called 911. She removed her blazer, folded it beneath his head, and stayed beside him, offering reassurance even though he never opened his eyes. Minutes stretched painfully. The ambulance finally arrived, and paramedics quickly took over, thanking her for remaining until they had gathered the information they needed. One medic asked for her name. Another requested a brief statement about what she had witnessed. Maya answered politely, signed the necessary form, and looked at the clock again. 23 minutes had disappeared. Her heart sank. She hurried toward Carter Global Holdings as fast as she could, breathing hard by the time she entered the elegant marble lobby. The receptionist offered a sympathetic smile after checking the schedule. The interview panel had already concluded the final candidate. Company policy did not allow exceptions for late arrivals. Maya tried to explain, not to earn sympathy, but simply to tell the truth. The receptionist listened kindly before apologizing once more. Holding her untouched portfolio against her chest, Maya quietly thanked her, turned toward the revolving doors, and stepped back onto the crowded Manhattan sidewalk. Around her, the city continued moving exactly as it always had, unaware that one act of kindness had just cost a young woman the opportunity she had spent years preparing to earn. She never imagined that the stranger she refused to abandon would soon become the only person powerful enough to change everything she believed had been lost. Maya Brooks walked nearly 10 city blocks before she finally allowed herself to stop. She found an empty bench beneath a row of autumn trees overlooking Bryant Park and carefully placed her portfolio beside her. The folders inside were still perfectly organized, untouched by the interview panel she had dreamed about meeting for years. She closed her eyes for a long moment, not because she regretted helping a stranger, but because she could not ignore the weight of what had just happened. Rent was due in less than 2 weeks. Her savings account had already been stretched thin after months of searching for the right opportunity. Every rejection had been disappointing, yet this one felt different because it had arrived before she even had the chance to prove herself. Her phone vibrated with a message from her mother asking how the interview had gone. Maya smiled gently despite the disappointment and replied that everything would be all right. She refused to send worry home when there was nothing her mother could do to change the outcome. Across the city, inside one of Manhattan's most respected private hospitals, the man Maya had refused to leave behind slowly opened his eyes. The first thing Ethan Carter noticed was the quiet beeping of medical equipment and the concerned faces of doctors standing nearby. After several routine examinations, the physicians assured him that he had experienced a temporary medical emergency brought on by exhaustion, dehydration, and weeks of relentless work. They insisted he would make a complete recovery with proper rest. Ethan listened politely, but one question remained fixed in his mind. He asked who had called for help. A nurse explained that a young woman had stayed beside him until the ambulance arrived, speaking calmly to him even though he never regained consciousness. She had answered every question from the emergency responders before quietly leaving without asking for recognition or expecting anything in return. Ethan frowned thoughtfully. That surprised him. Throughout his career as chief executive officer of Carter Global Holdings, he had become accustomed to people recognizing his face, his name, or the influence attached to both. Yet the woman who had saved him had apparently never realized who he was. She had simply seen another human being who needed help. He asked whether the hospital had recorded her information, but because she had not been the patient, privacy rules limited what could be shared. The only item left behind was a simple navy blazer that paramedics had carefully folded after using it to support his head before transporting him to the hospital. Ethan looked at the neatly folded jacket resting on a nearby chair and quietly thanked the nurse for keeping it safe. Something about its ordinary appearance carried extraordinary meaning. Back at her apartment that evening, Maya changed into comfortable clothes, brewed a cup of tea, and opened her laptop. New job listings filled the screen, each requiring years of experience, specialized certifications, or qualifications she was still working toward. Even so, she updated another application without hesitation. Giving up had never been part of her character. She reminded herself that kindness was never a mistake, even when it came with a painful price. Meanwhile, Ethan sat alone beside the large hospital window overlooking the Manhattan skyline as daylight slowly disappeared behind the buildings. He replayed the nurse's words again and again. A woman who owed him nothing had sacrificed something important enough to remain with a complete stranger until help arrived. He did not yet know her name, her story, or what she might have lost that morning because of him. But for the first time in many years, one business decision could wait. Finding the woman who had quietly walked away without expecting gratitude suddenly became more important than every meeting still waiting on his calendar. The following morning, Ethan Carter arrived at the headquarters of Carter Global Holdings earlier than anyone expected. His executive assistant noticed immediately that something had changed. Instead of asking for quarterly reports or market forecasts, Ethan requested every document connected to the previous day's analyst interviews. The human resources director entered the conference room carrying a neatly organized folder, assuming the chief executive officer wanted a summary of the hiring process. Ethan quietly reviewed the evaluation sheets, interview scores, and attendance records until one line caught his attention. Maya Brooks. Interview status, absent. Automatically disqualified under company policy. He paused before asking a simple question. Did anyone contact her to ask why she was late? The room fell silent. The human resources director explained that company policy treated all candidates equally. Anyone who failed to arrive before the scheduled interview time was automatically removed from consideration to ensure fairness for every applicant. Ethan nodded. He respected consistent standards. They had helped build the company's reputation. Yet something about this particular decision felt incomplete. He requested the exact interview schedule along with the time emergency medical services had responded to the incident near the company's headquarters. Within an hour, the timelines matched almost perfectly. Curious rather than convinced, Ethan contacted the city's security office through the appropriate legal channels and requested access to publicly available traffic camera footage related to the emergency response. Later that afternoon, the authorized recording appeared on a large conference room screen. Every executive present watched quietly as the video showed Maya rushing toward the fallen stranger instead of continuing toward the office tower only a short distance away. She remained beside him, speaking calmly, helping the emergency responders, answering their questions, and leaving only after they assured her they no longer needed assistance. Not once did she search his pockets, attempt to identify him, or behave as though she expected recognition. She simply walked away carrying her portfolio and disappeared into the crowd. Ethan leaned back in his chair, unable to ignore the truth unfolding before him. The woman who had sacrificed her interview had never known she was helping the head of the very company where she hoped to build her future. One executive suggested quietly that the matter was unfortunate, but already resolved because another candidate had accepted the position. Ethan disagreed without raising his voice. He explained that fairness was not always identical treatment. Fairness also required understanding circumstances beyond a person's control. Maya had not been careless. She had made an extraordinary choice that reflected exactly the kind of judgment, compassion, and responsibility the company claimed to value. Even so, he refused to offer her a job out of gratitude. That would replace one unfair advantage with another. Instead, he instructed human resources to organize an entirely new competitive assessment for several highly qualified finalists who had narrowly missed selection, including Maya Brooks. Every participant would complete the same evaluations under the same conditions, and every score would be reviewed anonymously before names were revealed. No one would know who had impressed the chief executive officer or why. As the meeting concluded, Ethan picked up the carefully folded navy blazer that had remained in his office since leaving the hospital. Looking at it once more, he realized he was no longer searching for a stranger simply to express thanks. He wanted to discover whether the quiet strength he had witnessed on that Manhattan sidewalk was the same strength that could transform the future of his company. Maya Brooks stared at the email on her laptop screen 3 separate times before allowing herself to believe it was real. Carter Global Holdings was inviting her to participate in a newly organized executive assessment that would include several finalists selected through an independent review process. The message explained that every candidate would complete the same exercises under identical conditions and that the highest overall performance would determine the final hiring decision. There was no apology for the missed interview and no special explanation for why she had been included. To Maya, it simply felt like an unexpected second chance, and she intended to earn it honestly. She spent the next 4 days preparing with even greater determination than before. Every evening after work at her temporary administrative job, she studied financial modeling, market analysis, communication strategies, and business case presentations until late at night. She practiced answering difficult interview questions aloud inside her apartment, timing every response with a small kitchen clock resting beside her notebook. She reminded herself repeatedly that opportunities could disappear just as quickly as they appeared, and she refused to waste this one. On the morning of the assessment, she arrived nearly an hour early, taking a quiet seat in the reception area while reviewing her notes one final time. Around her, the other candidates appeared equally qualified and confident. Some had advanced degrees from prestigious universities. Others had years of experience at respected financial firms. Maya did not compare herself with anyone else. She focused only on giving the strongest performance she was capable of delivering. Throughout the day, the candidates completed analytical exercises, collaborative problem-solving sessions, written evaluations, and individual presentations before a panel of senior executives. Maya listened carefully before speaking, supported every recommendation with clear reasoning, and treated every participant with respect, even during competitive discussions. Her confidence came not from trying to impress others, but from knowing she had prepared with discipline and sincerity. Behind a one-way observation window, Ethan Carter quietly watched portions of the assessment alongside the human resources leadership team. He had deliberately removed his name from the evaluation process to prevent any influence over the final results. Every candidate's work was identified only by anonymous numbers before being scored independently by multiple reviewers. Ethan remained silent as he observed candidate number 7, unaware to most evaluators that she was Maya Brooks, calmly leading a team discussion after 2 participants reached opposing conclusions. Rather than dismissing either opinion, she identified the strengths in both perspectives and proposed a balanced solution that improved the final recommendation. The room gradually shifted from disagreement to cooperation because one person had chosen to listen before leading. Ethan recognized the same quiet character he had witnessed on the Manhattan sidewalk. Not dramatic, not attention-seeking, simply dependable when it mattered most. Hours later, the final scoring sheets were collected and reviewed without candidate names attached. Only after every evaluator submitted their rankings did human resources reveal the identities behind each number. A quiet wave of surprise moved through the conference room when candidate number 7 finished with the highest combined score across every category. Maya Brooks had earned first place through merit alone. When she received the phone call later that evening offering her the analyst position, she closed her eyes and smiled before answering. Gratitude filled her voice, but so did confidence, because this victory belonged entirely to her own ability. She had no idea that the stranger whose life she had helped save had watched her prove, once again, that true character always reveals itself long before success ever does. The first weeks at Carter Global Holdings passed faster than Maya Brooks had imagined. Every morning she arrived before sunrise, carrying the same black leather portfolio that had accompanied her through years of interviews, temporary jobs, and uncertain beginnings. She treated every assignment with the same quiet discipline that had earned her the position, whether she was reviewing market reports, preparing investment summaries, or assisting senior analysts before important client meetings. Her managers quickly noticed that she never searched for shortcuts or recognition. When a project succeeded, she praised the team's effort before mentioning her own contribution. When unexpected problems appeared, she stayed late without complaining until every detail had been resolved. Gradually, colleagues began relying on her calm judgment whenever deadlines became stressful. Even clients appreciated the way she explained complicated financial information with clarity and patience. Several executives privately commented that she possessed a rare combination of intelligence and emotional awareness that could not be taught in any business school. Ethan Carter observed these developments from a respectful distance. Although he occasionally attended meetings where Maya presented research findings, he never offered her special treatment or unnecessary attention. He understood that the greatest way to honor her integrity was to allow her career to grow through her own achievements. Yet his admiration continued to deepen every time he saw her quietly helping coworkers solve problems that were not even part of her responsibilities. She reminded him daily that leadership often appeared long before a management title. Unfortunately, success rarely remained unnoticed. Whispered conversations slowly began spreading across the office. At first, they sounded harmless. Some employees wondered why the chief executive officer seemed unusually interested in reviewing projects prepared by a first-year analyst. Others questioned why human resources had organized a second assessment only weeks after the original hiring process had ended. The facts were incomplete, but imagination quickly filled every missing detail. Before long, casual speculation transformed into damaging assumptions. A few coworkers quietly suggested that Maya must have received hidden support from someone powerful. Others implied that her rapid success could not possibly be explained by ability alone. Nobody confronted her directly. Instead, conversations suddenly stopped whenever she entered the break room. Polite smiles disappeared into uncomfortable silence, and invitations to informal team lunches became less frequent. Maya noticed every change without saying a word. She had worked too hard to allow rumors to distract her from the career she had earned. She continued arriving early, completing every assignment with excellence, and treating everyone with kindness regardless of how they treated her in return. Even so, each whispered conversation left a small weight on her heart. She had sacrificed her greatest opportunity once because helping another person had mattered more than her own ambitions. Now, after finally earning a place through honest competition, people questioned the very integrity she valued above everything else. One evening, as the office gradually emptied, Maya remained alone reviewing financial projections near the window overlooking the glowing Manhattan skyline. Across the hall, Ethan noticed her working long after most employees had gone home. He considered walking over to thank her for another outstanding presentation earlier that afternoon, but he stopped himself before taking the first step. Every public interaction between them now risked feeding the very rumors he hoped would disappear. Standing quietly in his office, Ethan realized that his silence, intended to protect Maya's independence, might unintentionally be allowing false assumptions to grow stronger. Meanwhile, Maya packed her portfolio, switched off the desk lamp, and walked toward the elevator with quiet dignity. She had entered Carter Global Holdings believing that hard work would always speak louder than gossip. She still wanted to believe that was true, But for the first time since joining the company, she wondered whether character alone would be enough to overcome a story that people had already decided to believe. Over the following weeks, the whispers became impossible to ignore. Maya Brooks never heard anyone accuse her directly, but she could feel the change in every meeting, every hallway conversation, and every polite smile that disappeared the moment she approached. She remained focused on her work, believing that consistency would eventually silence speculation, yet each passing day seemed to prove the opposite. One afternoon, she entered a conference room a few minutes early to organize presentation materials. Before the rest of the team noticed her arrival, two employees standing near the coffee station quietly discussed how quickly she had earned the trust of senior leadership. One suggested that talent alone could not explain her progress. The other replied that companies always had favorites. Maya lowered her eyes, pretending she had not heard a single word. She calmly arranged the documents on the table exactly as she always did, greeted everyone with the same kindness, and delivered one of the strongest presentations of her career. The clients praised her analysis, the department director complimented her preparation, and the meeting concluded successfully. Yet while everyone celebrated the outcome, Maya felt strangely empty. She realized that achievements could improve results, but they could not always change opinions that had already been formed without evidence. That evening she remained in the office long after sunset, looking across the Manhattan skyline through the towering glass windows. She thought about the years she had spent believing that integrity would always protect a person's reputation. Now she understood that integrity often had to survive long seasons before it was finally recognized. After several quiet minutes, she opened her laptop and began writing a letter addressed to Human Resources. It was not a complaint. It was a resignation. Every sentence reflected gratitude for the opportunity she had been given, respect for the company, and appreciation for the colleagues who had supported her. She carefully explained that she did not want her presence to create unnecessary distractions for the organization or cast doubt upon decisions made by its leadership. She accepted full responsibility for stepping away because protecting her professional dignity mattered more than holding onto any position, no matter how meaningful it had become. She printed the letter, placed it inside an envelope, and left it on her desk before quietly turning off the lights. Across the executive floor, Ethan Carter happened to leave a strategy meeting later than expected. As he walked toward the elevators, he noticed the lights still glowing inside Maya's office. Curious, he stepped closer only to discover that she had already gone home. The envelope resting neatly on her desk immediately caught his attention. He did not open it himself. Instead, the following morning Human Resources informed him that Maya had formally submitted her resignation before business hours. Ethan requested a private meeting with the department director, who explained that Maya had offered no criticism, demanded no explanation, and blamed no individual. She had simply stated that she wanted the company to succeed without unnecessary controversy surrounding her employment. Ethan sat in silence after hearing those words. For the first time since recovering in the hospital, he recognized the unintended consequences of his own decisions. He had believed that keeping the truth hidden would protect Maya from unwanted attention. Instead, his silence had allowed false assumptions to grow until they nearly drove away the very person whose honesty and compassion had inspired him from the beginning. Looking through the office window toward the busy streets below, Ethan made a quiet promise to himself. He would not allow another day to pass with Maya carrying the burden of a story that was never true. If restoring her reputation required revealing everything that had happened on that Manhattan sidewalk, then the time for silence had finally come. On Monday morning, every member of Carter Global Holdings' executive leadership team gathered inside the main boardroom for what had been announced as a quarterly strategy meeting. Department heads, senior analysts, human resources leaders, and board members filled the seats around the polished conference table, expecting discussions about investments and market performance. Maya Brooks attended only because her resignation had not yet become effective. She sat quietly near the end of the room, believing this would be her final executive meeting before leaving the company with the same dignity she had carried from the beginning. Ethan Carter entered precisely on time, but instead of opening a financial presentation, he stood silently for several seconds while looking around the room. His expression was calm, yet unusually serious. He thanked everyone for attending before explaining that the first item on the agenda concerned leadership, integrity, and accountability rather than business results. Confused glances spread throughout the room. Without raising his voice, Ethan asked the technology team to activate the large presentation screen. Moments later, security footage obtained through proper legal authorization appeared before everyone. The recording showed a busy Manhattan sidewalk on the morning of the analyst interviews. Employees watched as a young woman carrying a black leather portfolio suddenly stopped beside a stranger who had collapsed. The room remained silent while the video continued. Maya carefully supported the man, stayed beside him while emergency responders arrived, answered their questions, and remained until they confirmed they no longer needed assistance. Only then did she rush toward the company's headquarters. The timestamp displayed on the screen revealed exactly why she had arrived too late for her interview. No one spoke. Ethan allowed the silence to settle before turning toward the audience. He explained that the unconscious stranger in the recording had been him. He admitted that Maya Brooks had no idea who he was, what company he led, or whether helping him would ever benefit her in any way. She had simply chosen compassion over convenience. He continued by explaining that after discovering the truth, he had refused to offer Maya special treatment. Instead, he ordered a completely independent assessment involving multiple qualified candidates, anonymous scoring, and identical evaluation standards. Human Resources confirmed that Maya had achieved the highest overall score before her identity had even been revealed to the evaluators. Ethan looked directly at the executives seated around the table and accepted responsibility for one critical mistake. He believed remaining silent would protect Maya from unwanted attention, but his silence had allowed false assumptions to replace the truth. The rumors that spread through the company had never been based on evidence. They had grown because leadership, including himself, had failed to correct them. Several department heads lowered their eyes. Others looked toward Maya with visible regret as they replayed months of conversations in their minds. Ethan then removed a folded navy blazer from his briefcase and gently placed it on the conference table. He explained that this ordinary jacket had remained with him since the day Maya had used it to protect the head of a complete stranger lying on a Manhattan sidewalk. To him, it represented character that could not be purchased, negotiated, or manufactured. Turning toward Maya, Ethan publicly thanked her not only for saving his life, but also for reminding him that the strongest leaders were often the ones who expected nothing in return. The boardroom remained completely silent until one board member slowly began applauding. Another followed. Within moments, every person in the room rose to their feet. Maya stood motionless, overwhelmed not by the applause itself, but by the simple realization that the truth she had never demanded was finally standing on its own. Maya Brooks stood quietly as the applause slowly faded, unsure how to respond to a room that only hours earlier had felt so distant. She had never imagined that the truth would be revealed in front of the entire executive leadership team, nor had she expected Ethan Carter to accept responsibility so openly for allowing misunderstanding to grow. When the meeting concluded, something remarkable happened. Instead of rushing back to their offices as they usually did, people approached Maya one by one. The first was the department director who had supervised her work during the previous months. He admitted that although he had always respected her performance, he should have challenged the rumors instead of assuming they would disappear on their own. Several co-workers followed with sincere apologies. Some confessed they had remained silent because they feared standing apart from the crowd. Others admitted they had believed stories without ever speaking to her personally. Maya listened to each person with the same calm expression that had carried her through every challenge since joining the company. She did not seek revenge, embarrass anyone, or remind them of the pain their assumptions had caused. Instead, she simply thanked them for their honesty and expressed hope that everyone had learned something valuable about judging people too quickly. Her quiet grace left an even stronger impression than the truth itself. Over the following weeks, the atmosphere inside Carter Global Holdings changed in ways that could not be measured on any financial report. Conversations became more respectful. Managers encouraged employees to question assumptions before accepting rumors as facts. Human Resources introduced new leadership workshops focused on professional integrity, accountability, and respectful workplace culture. Ethan personally attended every session, making it clear that these values were not symbolic policies, but expectations that applied equally to every employee, including himself. Maya noticed the difference almost immediately. Coworkers who had once avoided sitting beside her now actively invited her to collaborative meetings. Junior analysts sought her advice on complex projects because they trusted both her judgment and her patience. Even senior executives began requesting her perspective during strategic discussions, recognizing that her thoughtful approach often revealed solutions others had overlooked. Yet the greatest change did not happen inside conference rooms. It happened quietly between Maya and Ethan. Their conversations remained professional, but they gradually became more personal in the most respectful way. During brief walks through the company lobby after late meetings, they spoke about their families, the mentors who had shaped their lives, and the responsibilities that came with leadership. Ethan learned that Maya had spent years helping support her widowed mother while building her career one opportunity at a time. Maya discovered that Ethan often carried the invisible weight of making decisions that affected thousands of employees and their families. The more they talked, the more they recognized that true leadership had very little to do with titles or wealth. It depended far more on humility, responsibility, and the willingness to keep learning from difficult experiences. One evening, after a successful client presentation, Ethan thanked Maya for remaining patient even when circumstances had given her every reason to walk away. Maya smiled gently before answering that forgiveness was easier when people were willing to tell the truth. She explained that carrying bitterness would only allow yesterday's misunderstandings to steal tomorrow's opportunities. Ethan quietly reflected on those words long after she had left the building. He realized that the woman who had once sacrificed a dream interview for a complete stranger had now given him something even more valuable. She had shown him that genuine respect was earned through consistent character, not authority. As winter slowly gave way to spring across Manhattan, the foundation of trust between them continued to grow naturally, built not upon dramatic promises or grand gestures, but upon countless ordinary moments of honesty, kindness, and mutual admiration that neither of them had ever expected to find on the busiest sidewalk in New York City. 1 year later, the ballroom overlooking the Manhattan skyline glowed beneath crystal chandeliers as Carter Global Holdings hosted its annual Community Investment Gala, an event dedicated to celebrating scholarships, neighborhood development, and opportunities for families determined to build better futures. Guests from across the business world, nonprofit organizations, universities, and local communities filled the elegant hall with quiet conversations and hopeful anticipation. Near the front of the room, Maya Brooks stood confidently as the newly appointed executive director of the Carter Community Foundation, the organization she had helped transform into one of the company's most respected initiatives. Under her leadership, hundreds of students had received scholarships, dozens of small businesses had secured development grants, and countless young professionals had discovered mentors who believed in their potential long before success appeared. As she looked across the audience, Maya remembered another morning exactly 1 year earlier when she had walked through Manhattan carrying nothing more than a portfolio and a dream that seemed to disappear in a single moment. She smiled softly, realizing that life had not rewarded her because she expected something in return for doing the right thing. Instead, life had quietly opened doors she had never imagined because she refused to let disappointment change her character. Ethan Carter watched her from the side of the stage with deep admiration. During the past year, he had seen Maya lead difficult projects with humility, encourage employees others had overlooked, and remind everyone that compassion and excellence were never opposing qualities. She had become the kind of leader people naturally trusted because her actions remained consistent whether anyone was watching or not. As the evening's final presentation concluded, Ethan stepped to the podium and thanked the guests for supporting the foundation's mission. Then, instead of ending the ceremony, he looked toward Maya and invited her to join him on stage. The audience applauded warmly as she walked forward, believing she was about to receive another recognition for the foundation's achievements. Ethan smiled before speaking again. He told the audience that exactly 1 year earlier, a young woman had sacrificed the opportunity she had spent years preparing for in order to help a complete stranger lying on a busy Manhattan sidewalk. She had not asked his name, expected a reward, or imagined that one ordinary decision would forever change 2 lives. He admitted that the greatest lesson he had learned during the past year was that true wealth was measured not by financial success, but by the character people chose when no one expected anything from them. Reaching into his jacket pocket, Ethan held out a simple, elegant ring. His voice remained steady as he asked Maya whether she would continue building a future beside him, not because she had once saved his life, but because every day afterward she had shown him what integrity, kindness, courage, and unconditional respect truly looked like. Tears of joy filled Maya's eyes as she smiled and quietly answered yes. The ballroom erupted into heartfelt applause while friends, colleagues, scholarship recipients, and community leaders rose together in celebration. There were no dramatic fireworks, no extravagant displays, only genuine happiness shared among people who understood the extraordinary journey that had brought them together. As the applause slowly settled, Maya looked toward the city lights shining beyond the ballroom windows and realized that the greatest opportunities often arrive disguised as impossible sacrifices. Sometimes losing the future you planned simply makes room for the future you were always meant to build. And the smallest act of kindness offered to a stranger can become the beginning of a legacy that changes far more than one life.